maybe I should just try telling these people the truth and see what happens. And a nurse came over to set the IV because I was dehydrated as all get out and said, "What are you here for?" And I said, "I drink too much." He said, "Okay, how much?" I said, "Probably about a quart of vodka a day." "Okay, we'll take care of you." And that was it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crab and the Cross podcast. I'm your host, Mary Rose, and today Father Richard Whitney shares with me his journey from alcoholism to sobriety to the priesthood. I'm not exaggerating when I say that people who have gone through recovery are some of the most incredible people I have ever met. I feel like they have such a tangible experience of redemption where they have come from the lowest pits of rock bottom and ascended to a place that is honestly higher than most people who have never struggled with addiction find themselves. If you look at the 12 steps that are used by Alcoholics Anonymous, they involve this radical path of humility and healing and forgiveness and self-discovery that I really think anybody could benefit from. I mean, you know, if you're Catholic, you have the experience of going to confession, but imagine having to take the time to personally reach out to people that you have harmed and make amends with them. That has got to be such a humbling experience. So I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. I love the transparency and the openness that Father Richard Whitney speaks with about his journey. But it's also really tragic to hear from him how few people make it through recovery without ever having relapsed. There's not a lot I can say intelligently or authoritatively about addiction. It sounds like there's a lot that even psychologists and doctors don't fully understand about addiction, but just from my own experience of trying to overcome bad habits, even when there's not like this chemical component to it, just shows me how much more difficult it must be when the thing you're trying to give up or the thing you're trying to overcome has like this physiological hold on you. So I just have so much respect for people who have struggled with addiction and especially those who have successfully completed recovery. If you are somebody who is struggling with alcoholism or another kind of addiction, of course, I encourage you to seek help. I think the 12-step program sounds incredible, and often there's a real sense of community that comes from that. If somebody you know is struggling with addiction, I ask Father Richard at the end of the interview what advice he would give, so you will have to listen to the whole interview to hear what he has to say. Please share this episode with somebody you know, subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, follow on Instagram, follow on Twitter, comment on YouTube, and rate and review in Apple Podcasts. And now my conversation with Father Richard Whitney. Father Richard Whitney is a Paulist priest based in Knoxville, Tennessee. He spent 20 years as a stagehand in the D.C. area before becoming an addictions counselor. Then in 2015, he joined the Paulist Fathers and was ordained just last year. Father Richard, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Mary Rose. It's so nice to see you again.
I know, yeah. So Father Richard and I, we met at a conference this summer for college campus ministers, and we are both very new to the position.
Completely brand new. I had started, I think, a month prior to that conference.
Yeah, I had not started. So you had a month of experience on me. You're a regular veteran.
Most of us were kind of new to the game, though, I noticed.
Yeah.
There were not a lot of people had been doing it for years and years and years. And even those who had were still kind of, well, just try something and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that the job itself, it sounds like it has a high turnover rate.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that's necessarily because it's a bad job. I mean, so far I think it's a great job, but it's an odd job because the hours are not typical, and it's not, I'm not in the poorhouse, but it's not like a,
Yeah.
a
No,
high
you're not
paying
getting.
career. You're not probably not going to support a family on it.
No, and that's the thing, because as a priest, they can say to me, "Go do that." And I don't really necessarily have a life. I don't
Yeah.
have a family. I don't have to, I'm not looking to make a family. So it's the people who do that I really wonder, boy, this is got to be very challenging because the
Yeah.
hours are screwy. The energy that's required is really high scale all the time,
Yeah,
you
definitely.
know.
Yeah. There is one person in my archdiocese who it's a male, and he's got, I think, 5 or 6 kids, and he's been a campus minister for, I think, close to a decade. So I mean, that's like
Wow.
a very special vocation, but I think that's probably the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah. No, I would think so. I haven't met many, but again, like you, not been playing this game
Right.
very long.
Right. Are the Paulist Fathers, are they at a lot of college campuses? Is that a typical like apostolate?
It was for a while. The way campus ministry came about, especially in the early part of the 20th century, as these big state schools came about, Catholic families were worried about what's going to happen to our kids if they go to this college that's not a Catholic college.
Hmm.
And generally, the feeling among priests was, well, then if you're worried, send your kids to a Catholic college. But that's not always possible. And so the Paulist Fathers, as a missionary order, stepped in to sort of fill that gap that nobody really wanted to work in.
Oh, wow.
Now, more and more bishops are seeing colleges as potential places for vocations, and they worry that, well, maybe people who are interested in vocations aren't going to be so interested if we don't have a diocesan priest in there.
Hmm.
So we're being invited to explore other venues now as Paulists. So we were very, very involved. Now, not quite so much.
Yeah, that's kind of strange because I like to think that like we're all on the same team, like whether you're a diocesan priest or a Paulist father or whatever religious order. It's like a vocation to the priesthood is, a vocation to the priesthood. It's going to benefit the church
Well,
no matter what.
no, that's true. A vocation is a vocation, but it's a very different vocation for a religious order than a diocesan priest.
Yeah.
We do very, very different things. And even in our seminary, which is very small, we only have about 8 to 10 guys most of the time. There's still some transfer between what we do and over to the diocesan side because diocesan tend to focus in one geographical area.
Yeah.
They tend to live alone now. They tend to manage 2 or 3 parishes more and more often.
Yeah.
And they really have more roots in an area.
That's true.
The
Yeah,
guy that
that's
I used to
true.
work for when I was in seminary, he discerned with the Paulists for a while, but family's so important to him that he decided to become a diocesan. So he's close to his family. He knows he's never going to be moving far away from that.
Yeah.
Whereas missionary priests, we move around a lot more and we tend to specialize.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your story. When we met, we found out that we had a couple things in common. We both went to Catholic University of America. Woohoo! We both were involved in the theater department there. You went on to really have a long career in the theater world. And then you also shared some about your background, just going through recovery. And
Mm-hmm.
while I haven't personally gone through recovery, I know people who have, and it's one of the most inspiring things. And I don't think people who maybe haven't wrestled with addiction, I don't think we often realize like how tremendous of an accomplishment it is. And so I wanted you to share a little about your story, but let's start way back in the beginning. So what was your family background? Like, were you raised in a Catholic home? Were you raised in a home where there was also addiction?
I was raised a Catholic. Both my parents are Catholic. Dad was in the Navy, so we moved around a lot. There was a fair bit of bouncing around and a very classic Irish Catholic family. So you never talk about any problems. So yes, there's all kinds of addiction and mental health issues running through the
Mm.
family, but we never talked about it until I finally broke down. I think I was
Wow.
the first person in my family to accept treatment.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow. And how old were you when you entered treatment?
I was 37.
Oh, so that's like a long time. Your parents are probably retired by that point.
Let's see. Yeah, they had.
Yeah.
Yes, they had. Dad's final duty station was in D.C.,
Okay.
which is why I happened to start working in theater in D.C. at the time. And then they moved back to the Boston area in 2005.
Mm.
I finally hit the end of my rope and asked for help.
Wow. Um, so for you, do you think that it was a sort of a slow progression into addiction, or was it something that happened, pretty soon after you first were introduced to alcohol?
I'd say it was fairly immediate.
Mm.
And this is a story I hear quite a bit in lots and lots of AA meetings. From that first sip, I knew this is the thing I was looking for.
Wow. Yeah, see, I think that's such a strong difference between, and I don't know what it is, but I think it's a difference between people who, have addiction backgrounds versus those who don't. Because I know a lot of people who their first sip of alcohol, they're like, oh, this doesn't taste good, and I don't even
Yeah.
like this. Or maybe they get a little buzz, but it just isn't, that enticing. And for
Hmm.
whatever reason, there are people, and there's got to be something in their makeup or their biology. I don't think it's just like the pure deliciousness of it, like when
No,
you
it tasted awful, but I powered through that.
yeah, yeah.
I worked through that pain.
Right, right. Um, were you still in like high school at the time, or?
No, I actually was a late bloomer. I didn't really start drinking until I entered Catholic University.
Mm, yeah.
And what got me is I was cast in a play, and the entire cast went out for beers every night. And so I did too. And this was great. And
Yeah.
that's really what, there were some things in high school, but at 19 was really the mark of when it started for
Mm,
me.
yeah. And do you think that others around you like noticed that there was something off, like maybe you were struggling with it more than others, or was it just so much the culture to just drink and have a good time that, you just kind of blended in?
It was part of the culture. I mean, this was the late 80s,
Yeah.
and there was a lot. We could still smoke in restaurants, smoke inside.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot more drink, but even still, I stood out.
Yeah. Yeah. Did anybody ever approach you and say, hey, Richard, like, take it down a
No,
notch?
not for years and years and years after that.
Hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned like you were, raised in an Irish Catholic family. You went to Catholic University. Did you have any involvement with the faith once you went to college, or was it kind of like, see ya?
No, no, not at all. I had actually given up on Catholicism in my mid-teens
Really?
because when I was in my early adolescence, I started developing major clinical depression,
Hmm.
which most people don't get until their early 20s, but I'm an overachiever. I also there's a host of learning disabilities too that nowadays would have been picked up on really, really early.
Hmm.
But back then, I was lazy and unmotivated and all those things that made me not like school very much and just shut down.
Mm.
So God made me different,
Yeah.
and I didn't like this one little bit. Also, just to add insult to injury, I was a redhead before my hair went completely white.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a bright orange, the carrot top redhead.
Yeah.
And so this made me stand out. I don't like standing out. There's a reason I worked backstage for so long.
Mm.
So God made me different. I didn't like that one little bit. Didn't want anything to do with that, and so very angrily rejected God and became one of those really annoying atheists that will tell you everything that you're doing wrong. I think you've met him.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we all have. I was one
Mm-hmm.
of them. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
proud of that, but it's
Sure.
part of the whole story.
Yeah. Did your parents still make you go to church with them on Sundays?
I tried to avoid visiting them on Sundays.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. So did you feel like sort of a tension in your spirit to go to a school that's very prominently called the Catholic University of America?
Actually, no. The reason I went to Catholic University is quite simple. They accepted me. That was it. My grades were not good.
Mhm.
It took me 5 years of high school to get through 4 years of work, and so and Catholic University actually they still do, but the drama program is astonishing.
Yeah.
It's really well known, and one of the best parts about it is the people you meet there,
Mhm.
and so you can through those connections work steadily. I did.
Yeah. I,
And I didn't last long. And certainly, I would say there were a handful of people in the drama department that were very serious about their Catholic faith.
yeah.
And even still, before each show, we used to get together, the cast, the crew, and whoever happened to be wandering backstage at the time. Everybody would get into a circle, hold hands, say the Our Father, and pray to St. Genesius, who I had
Hmm.
never heard of before, but that's the patron saint of performers. And he's sitting over my shoulder there.
Oh, okay. Wow. What was his connection to theater? Was he an actor?
He was a martyr in the 300s, and he was a performer. And in one of the last great purges of Christians in the Roman Empire, he was performing a play that was very ridiculed Christianity.
Hmm.
And he had a conversion experience on stage. He didn't understand it. Went and found a Christian priest and said, "What's going on here? Why can't I get these lines out? This pain, it's too hard for me to say my lines." And the priest let him know what was happening and baptized him. The next night, he went out on stage, and the emperor was there. And he said to the emperor, "Emperor, I can't do this. Christianity is a beautiful thing. This is mocking. This is wrong. We can't have this." And the emperor was so moved that he had Genesius skinned alive and then executed.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So he is the patron saint of performers, stand-ups, and theater peoples.
Yeah, right. Which in a way it's sort of fitting too because the common, term in the theater world is like break a leg, and like
Yeah.
Genesius takes it one step further, he's like, "Hey, get skinned alive." Yeah, I know when I met you, we talked about Father Hartke. Did you say that he was there when you were a student, or was he since gone?
No, he died the year before I got
Okay,
there,
okay.
but his legacy was still very much around. I mean, everybody who was there knew him. I
Mhm.
mean, except for us incoming first years.
Right, right.
So everybody knew him. His stories about him were there. It was he's just a remarkable man, and really, really loved theater.
Yeah. Yeah, for those who don't know, he was a Dominican priest,
Yeah,
but he was like very instrumental, very involved in the theater department at Catholic University.
he
Um,
founded it.
did he found it
Basically,
really?
yeah, no, he was
Wow.
told back early on, I want to say the 30s, don't hold me to this,
Okay.
that but this was back when Catholic University was still just a graduate school. It was just for building priests.
Mhm.
That was its whole purpose in life. That's how it was founded in 1888. And then in the 30s, somebody realized, priests do some performative activities. Why don't we get somebody who knows what that is to teach priests how to use their voice, their bodies, how to use the space, how to know what they're doing, like actors do?
Yeah.
Hey, let's get a guy who knows acting. So Father Harkey came in and he brought in Mrs. Caldwell almost immediately, a PhD in voice coaching. And so right next to the Hartke Theater is the Caldwell Theater,
Yeah.
named for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I believe Fulton Sheen studied under Father Harkey, and I mean, you listen to him, and he's just a masterful speaker, orator. I mean, he had a television show, and he just, the way he could like hone in on the camera and like recite his
Yeah.
I don't want to say his lines, because I don't think he was like going on a script, but you
No,
just,
but he was prepared, and he had
yeah,
all the skills. He had the tools. He had that wonderful silky voice,
yeah,
and
yeah.
he knew how to dress for the camera
I know
and
he had the long cape
get
on,
the capa, and yeah, no, it's just phenomenal. And millions used to tune into that every week.
Yeah, yeah.
It was almost like football.
Right, right. What's interesting though is I don't know. So I mean, yeah, he was, well executed, like, his craft of preaching, but I feel like in our world today, people don't like that as much. They like something that seems like maybe quote unquote natural, like
Yeah.
authentic. They would see that as too performative and not inauthentic. And so I don't think that he would have the same success necessarily. I think that people would almost be uncomfortable, like, oh, is he just playing a role? Is he just pretending? And I don't think that he was, but he just, maybe in that era, like, I mean, in that era, everything was just more formal, more, I mean,
Yeah, it doesn't translate so well today. I mean,
yeah,
what he's teaching hasn't really changed, but
sure.
you're right. The way he does it comes across as stilted and melodramatic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would play him for my students when I was a theology teacher, and the reviews were mixed. So I remember somebody referred to him as Gregory Peck,
Yeah.
which you can kind of see a resemblance. Others referred to him as like the black and white person, because all the videos are in black and white. But
Yeah.
like when you just like kind of let the optics, you don't focus on the optics and you just listen to what he's saying, like he's, yeah, a very moving speaker.
Hmm. Yeah, it's almost a medium that translates better to radio for us today
Yeah.
than the television of the time.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. So when you were a student at CUA, like you mentioned that you had some learning disabilities, did you struggle academically there as well?
Oh, I failed out.
Oh, you did.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
really early.
Wow.
And,
So,
and then I talked my way back in and decided that I hated everything about this. I had no interest in school, and obviously school wasn't for me because all of my experiences in school were bad.
yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, crashed and burned hard.
So then did you just hang around like the theater world with the connections you developed, and that's how you
I
got.
was able to get work pretty easily. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and also this was a timing issue that I had nothing to do with. But in the mid late 80s, the theater scene in DC exploded and went from about 4 to almost 40 small theaters.
Yeah. Wow. That's
So
incredible.
nobody had enough hands.
Yeah. Wow.
And so if you knew which end of a hammer to hold, chances are you were going to get hired. It wasn't because of my great skill or reliability. It was because they just needed people
Yeah.
desperately.
Wow. Just out of curiosity, I mean, did you ever end up getting formally diagnosed with like a learning disability, so you could know like what was, causing that disconnect?
In my 40s, after getting sober and going through mental health treatment, there's ADHD and stuff that I can't remember, which quite honestly, at this point, it doesn't matter. I've learned
Yeah.
how to work around,
Right.
and most of the drugs that are used to treat these things don't work very well with me.
Hmm.
Um, there's something about redheads and pharmaceuticals, and we don't react well.
Do you really think that's true, or are you just
Yeah, no, I've heard this
really?
from other redheads, and I had a couple operations when I was a kid, and each time I got violently ill, except the one time that the anesthesiologist was a redhead, and he told me and my mom that, yeah, we're going to be careful with this one. We don't react normally.
Wow, I've never heard that before.
So yeah, I don't know if there's actual studies
Sure.
about this. I've never
Yeah.
looked into it, but it's kind of true for me,
Oh my
at
gosh.
least. And so I'm always a little twitchy. When I first looked into treatment for depression, obviously there are all kinds of things coming out on the market that they wanted to try on me. And for me, every single one of them the side effects were worse than what we were trying to treat. And so after a couple of
Wow.
years, we finally just gave up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, after this, I'm gonna text my redhead friend and ask her, like,
Yeah.
you know, well, I do know that she's like the kind of person that just passes out with a needle. But I don't know if that's
Hmm.
a redhead thing. That might just be her.
I'll kind of do that too. I look the
Really?
other way when they draw blood or give me shots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. So you spent, 2 decades in DC in the theater world.
Hmm.
Was it just steady work, or was there ever times when you were like had a couple months where you're like, nothing's going on, like, got to get out there and hustle?
There were some of those down times, but more often than not, I mean, I was freelance through most of that. There were times that I had regular steady jobs, but again, because of the addictions, I wasn't particularly stable or reliable.
Mm.
So no job lasted more than 3 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And usually, I mean, I the biggest two biggest issues I've had consistently is I'm smart enough to figure out what you want to hear, and I'm a good enough actor to make you believe what I'm telling you.
Hmm.
So usually I was able to sneak out before the hammer came down.
Hmm. And you said this was in the 80s. It's probably not a complete stereotype that there's a lot of, gay or LGBT people in the theater world. This was, of
Mm-hmm.
course, during the eruption of the AIDS crisis. Did you lose a lot of friends, or people that you worked with during that time?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I can think of a couple,
Yeah.
but I mean, again, and this is a classic hallmark of addiction. It is a really dysfunctional relationship, but codependent is the word that's thrown around, and I don't like to use it because clinically it has no meaning whatsoever. But it creates an image in our minds of a really bad relationship that you can't get out of.
Hmm.
And that's what addiction is. So I never really got all that close to anybody
Wow.
for the period that I was in active addiction,
Wow.
those 18 years.
Did you find that there were certain, like maybe triggers that would lead you to going on a more significant like binge or anything like that? Like, was it more like the depression would lead to the drinking, or was there a cycle?
No, I was very consistent, about a 12 pack a night.
Wow. The thing that's sort of fascinating to me is like just take the alcohol out of it. Like, that's just a lot of liquid. That's just like a lot of
Yes, it
beverages,
is. And
like
it does all kinds of weird things to you. So yeah, it's not, I don't suggest it. Later
wow.
on, I switched to vodka, which had less alcohol, less liquid content,
Right.
but still, it's the same problem.
Right, right.
If there was nothing that I had to be at, I was drinking.
Yeah. Wow. Did you live alone mostly?
Oh, yeah.
So, flash forward, can you describe like that rock bottom moment, what led to it, and how you knew, sort of woke up and knew you needed help?
I had been going through a rough patch for a couple of months and lots of suicidal ideation and lots more drinking than normal. And I basically lost the ability to fake it. I
Mm.
mean, I was never faking it well, but it had just ended. My last relationship had broken up, sort of, not sort of, very ugly, and I was completely lost and at wit's end. And there were a couple of times, and there were signs about this that I could have picked up on anywhere along the way. And I remember one time I have had a consistent nightmare since childhood of falling and not being able to stand again.
Hmm.
And this happened to me twice that summer because I was withdrawing. And when you get to a certain level of alcoholism, the body requires a certain level of alcohol in you just to function.
Right.
And so as it was slipping down below that level, I would get dizzy and couldn't walk.
Wow. So were you intentionally like, oh, I have a problem, I need to quit drinking, and then you'd go through those withdrawal symptoms?
No, this was just I ran out in the house and had to go get more.
Oh, wow.
I didn't plan it well enough. So those
Wow.
people that you hear about that have to have half a pint or something first thing in the morning just to steady the nerves to get going,
Hmm.
that's absolutely true. That was me for a while.
Wow. It's also just expensive, right?
It was not as expensive, but it was going up
Sure.
quickly. Yes,
Yeah.
and it just the quality that you're buying just gets lower and lower and lower. At the end, I was drinking ruble.
It's like a Russian
It's this cheap, nasty, tastes like gasoline vodka.
oh, okay. Yeah.
It's just the tagline that they used for a while was a modern vodka for a modern bum, and
Oh
that was me.
no. Oh
That
no.
was just perfectly it. So everything had just fallen down, and there was despair, and I couldn't see any way out. I couldn't think, and I quite honestly, I don't know what it was that kicked me in the butt to say go get help.
Yeah.
Other than I think the Holy Spirit's continued slapping me upside the head. And I finally felt it. And I called the only two people who were still talking to me, which were my parents.
Wow.
And I said, I think I need help. And my mother said, I know you do. Wait there.
Wow.
And so they took me to a rehab. The name I forget because I was kind of out of it at the time.
Mm.
But they took one look at me and said, yeah, he needs medical clearance. So I spent the next 2 weeks in an emergency room and then a double locked ward because, you can't do all those things and have your liver and your kidneys and all the other parts of you be happy with this behavior.
Right. Yeah. So do you remember what it was like to go through withdrawal, or were you kind of, you know,
I remember everything.
wow. Because yeah,
And
I mean,
it,
they probably can't give you, like, oh, let's give him some morphine to kind of, like that's gonna be
well, they did at the time
really.
because alcohol withdrawal actually can kill you.
Mm.
Heroin won't. It feels like it, but it's not going to kill you. Alcohol actually will kill you. So the old school AA people used to go off and get somebody who wanted help, and they'd bring a flask with them just so they could taper them off.
Wow.
And for me, they gave me benzodiazepines, which naturally I got immediately hooked on, and then had to come off of that.
Yeah.
But it smoothed out it made it easier for me to get through,
Okay.
but it hurt a lot.
Yeah. Can you describe it? Like what was the physical experience of it?
Well, it was a whole body experience because I'd also not been eating much, and I mean, you met me. You can't see it on the camera, but I'm a big guy.
Mhm.
There were ribs showing.
Wow.
I was about 165 pounds, I think, and that when the first time I stepped on the scale and saw that shocked me more than anything else.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of I was too dizzy to walk for about a week and had to relearn that. Just really shaky all the time and a lot of muscle pain. Well, I hadn't been using muscles,
Mm.
so learning how to be human again. And then, of course, the feelings of shame and disappointment and loss, and again, like the relationship thing, what am I supposed to do without this companion that I've had with me for the past 18 years as I move forward?
So you go through like this 2 week kind of intensive withdrawal, and then do you go to like a more long-term facility?
That's what I did. I was locked up in a psych ward because I was considered to be a danger to myself or others,
Wow.
which in Massachusetts is the guideline. And because medically I couldn't continue that way.
Mm-hmm.
Even after my organs finally stabilized, they didn't want to let me go until they had someplace else to put me because I couldn't be trusted on my own. And they were right. So from there, I went to a rehab, and it was good. It taught me a lot about sort of the scientific, psychological aspects of my addiction and what I was doing. And it helped me understand, kind of where I was and what I had to do to continue to stay sober. But I could tell that this wasn't really clicking for me.
Mm.
It was primarily a cognitive behavioral therapy type focus, and it wasn't doing it. And not that they were doing anything wrong. What they were trying to do is stabilize us and then send us back into the world and go to AA and do that. But it just wasn't clicking for me. And they suggested that I look at this other rehab up in the hills of New Hampshire, in actually the town where my mother's grandparents live. My great grandfather had a jewelry shop there.
Wow.
In Plymouth, New Hampshire. So I went there, and they were entirely spiritually based.
Really?
12-step spirituality. That's how you do it. And that is, I'm convinced, the only reason I'm sober today.
Wow. Was it like, I know with the 12 steps they talk about like a higher power, but was this place explicitly like Christian or anything, or was it just like that kind of generic, like, yeah.
It was very generic. They look at you and say, okay, for somebody as bad as you, the only way you're going to get sober and stay sober, the cheapest, fastest, easiest only, is to go find yourself God. Okay.
Were you still very much like an atheist at that point, or was it, did you find that, like, were you resistant to that idea when you went there?
No, I'd had a massive change of heart while I was shockingly lying on a gurney, unable to move really, in the emergency room. I had this thought which came completely unbidden, and it has to be the workings of the Holy Spirit as I look back on it. But I'm lying there and I'm thinking to myself, I haven't been to a doc. I haven't told any doctor the truth in 20 odd years, because if I did, they would have told me to stop drinking. I don't want to stop drinking. Don't tell the doctor the truth. You don't have to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Everything works. While I was lying there, I said, maybe I should just try telling these people the truth and see what happens. And a nurse came over to set the IV because I was dehydrated as all get out, and said, "What are you here for?" And I said, "I drink too much." He said, "Okay, how much?" I said, "Probably about a quart of vodka a day." "Okay, we'll take care of you." And that was it. Just no yelling, no angry, no nothing. Just, okay, we've seen this. We can help you. Well, I'd be an idiot to turn down help. So at that point, I had just sort of accepted that if I tell these people the truth and try it, bad things don't happen and good things might. So I was open to the idea of spirituality. It sounded like something that I had to do because the science wasn't doing it.
Yeah.
And that went on when I started moving into working with other addicts. Consistently, what I saw is the people who were able to embrace their spiritual nature, and I firmly believe that we all have a spiritual nature. Those who were able to embrace it were able to heal much more fully, completely, easily. And so within about a week of being at Plymouth House, I don't even know if it was a week, I had given up on my angry atheist ways and started wondering, what does it mean to accept God
Wow.
in just those terms?
Yeah. Did you have a moment where you felt like God was very directly like speaking to you, or present with you?
several.
Yeah.
And once I sort of learned what those were, because the first time that happened, I was still in the first place and just didn't know what it was. I thought it was just some sort of weird time lapse thing.
Hmm. What do you mean? Like what happened?
Well, I was standing and looking over a cranberry bog, which outside of cranberry season is a fancy word for swamp.
Uh-huh.
And it was October in New England, late October in New England. It was cold. The sun was going down, and I felt this sense of peace and calm and love and protection like I'd never known before.
Wow.
And then the sun went down. I realized I was cold, walked back inside and realized I'd been out there for about 90 minutes.
Okay, so this is not just a vision. You were actually out there in a
I
cranberry
was
bog.
outside
Okay.
and feeling all these things for about 90
Wow.
minutes,
Yeah.
and it was so comforting that I didn't even realize the passage of
Oh,
time.
wow. That's really interesting. Yeah. Was this a large facility or was it very like were there a lot of people there with you?
It was fairly small.
Yeah.
Both of them were fairly small, maybe 40 people.
Oh, that sounds bigger than I would think. That's actually, yeah. Did you develop strong bonds with the people that you went through recovery with?
Yes, and they almost all fell apart within a couple of years after leaving,
Hmm.
as a lot of people relapse. A lot of people died.
Really?
Yeah, just
From a
not
relapse
uncommon.
or from a relapse or
Yeah.
wow. Wow. Even from this more spiritual facility, it was a similar rate.
I don't know. Not, because I really lost touch with the first place.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and with the second place, there were, yeah, they would, it's tough because we don't really keep statistics that mean anything. Um, but we do know that generally our success rate is around 15%.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's
10 to 15, which means, of course, a 85 to 90% failure rate in addiction recovery.
yeah.
Whatever we're doing, we're not doing it right.
What would you attribute that to? Do you think it's um just the nature of addiction that it's just such a strong bond that it's almost impossible to break?
I think we don't really understand what we're dealing with psychologically,
Hmm.
quite honestly. My sense is psychology's greatest mistake was trying to separate itself from philosophy and try to become its own science.
Wow. Yeah. That's
Because if you read Socrates, Marcus Aurelius, all the philosophers trying to figure out what makes us tick, what makes us happy.
right. Right.
And then psychology became more of a science in the 19th century, became tried to become a science
Yeah.
with quantifiable proofs and such. And there's no room for the spirit in
Yeah.
that. And I think that that's what's missing from a lot of modern psychology.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, it's kind of divorced from the body too. You know, it's sort of a dualist approach, and I think physical health can also have a strong impact on the mind or what you're
Oh,
doing
yeah.
physically. I mean, what you're eating, you know, how you're sleeping, whether you're exercising, you know, all these like very
All the things. Yeah,
yeah.
no, they all go into making us what we are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and then you factor in like life experience, you know, if you've had traumas and, you know, just wounds, you know, things that people have done to you or said to you, things that you say to yourself. It's like there's all these things that aren't contained within the person. They're kind of external to it and they influence
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Wow. So, but you were praise God successful. What did you do once you left?
I went back to school and finished my degree in history because I'd always liked reading history at Northeastern
Hmm.
and did really well. Shockingly, If you spend 20 years reading history, undergraduate history isn't that hard.
Yeah.
And, I learned to work around a lot of my innate problems. And so finished school, graduated, got accepted into Northeastern's history program and the PhD program, and lasted about long enough to realize, wow, academia is not for me.
Mm.
And again, the depression as I'm trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with my life. And the idea came up of, why don't you try helping people who are like you? And as it turns out, as soon as I mentioned this, everything fell into place immediately. There was a counseling program at a school with a price that was right just down the street from me, brand new. That was great. So I went to that and started doing some work around. And along the way, life was okay and things were going okay. And I kept feeling like there's something else I could be doing here. And I came up with the idea that, maybe I need to be a deacon, because I'd come back to the Catholic faith at that point, about a year sober, as I'm trying to understand that this infinite God that's around me. It led me back to the faith of my childhood, and I realized how many issues I had were quite simply reactionary.
Wow. When you first went back to church after that, was there were you fearful? Like, were you afraid of being rejected, or was it just, an excitement like, oh, I'm going back home?
I was I didn't want to go, quite honestly. And the little voice in the back of my head that would give me good advice kept saying, you should go to church. I don't want to go to church. You should go to church. I really don't want to go to church. Finally, I broke down and said, okay, you know what? I will go to church this Sunday. But I'm not used to crowds, so I think that I should go to the 7:30 Mass. And just to make sure that this is an actual thing, I'm not going to set my alarm. And I think I was also a jerk and stayed up till 2 that night playing video games. And I woke up at 5:30. And so I went to church, and it was like the stories of falling in love as I stepped in. I remember everything. I remember the dust patterns in the air. I remember what the priest preached on that day. It was around the Feast of St. Blaise. I remember how it smelled, how it looked, how it felt. It was obvious that this was a good thing. And so, I only really had my parents looking forward to see how you're supposed to act when you go to a new church. And what they always did was they got involved. They volunteered for stuff. Mm-hmm. And so a few weeks later, we entered Lent. And I figured, okay, you know what? Let's try this. Each week, I'm going to try a new thing. And we'll see how that goes. And it was phenomenal. It was one of the best experiences of Lent I've ever known, before or after.
Wow.
Just that exercise of opening myself up to volunteering, different types of prayer, different groups, different outreaches. All these things added up to, there's a lot more here than I ever imagined.
Wow. Was this in the Boston area?
Yeah, this was in Cambridge. I went to St. Paul's, which is the campus ministry for Harvard University.
Oh, okay. Wow. So there's probably a lot going on at that particular church.
There was, yeah. It was a neighborhood church, and you also had Harvard students. So there was.
Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. But then it was a few years into that you were like starting to think about diaconate.
Then I started thinking about the diaconate, and I asked my pastor, and it turned out that the vocations director for deacons was the deacon at my parents' church. So I already knew him. Well, this makes sense, but I also thought to call the Paulists.
How did you know that?
Well, I just met the Paulists, which was interesting because a friend of mine had written a play called Conversations with My Molester, which was how he was molested by his priest when he was 12 years old. and he asked me to stage manage it for him. And I didn't want to do this because I promised not to do theater anymore. And I'd seen enough Catholic bashing pieces. I think I knew how this ended. Well, I was wrong. This is a stunningly beautiful piece. Michael Mack's conversation with my molesters made me cry every night, and I knew how it ended.
Wow.
But who let us perform it in their basement? The Paulists. So that's how I met the Paulists. And when I started wondering about vocations, I talked to the pastor at St. Paul's, which is where I went to for daily mass. But I also called Father Rick over at the Paulists, which is where I went for Sunday after that experience. And Father Rick called me back and said, hey, you know what? That's great. We don't do deacons. Okay. But tell you what, why don't you talk to our vocation director? And he might be able to help you with that. So Father Larry Rice talked to me for a while, and he invited me up to a discernment retreat that they have at Lake George in upstate New York, which is a property that was given to the Paulists back in the 1870s.
Oh, wow.
And so I went there with 9 other guys, and for a week, we did a discernment retreat. And the 3rd or 4th day I was there, I was saying a rosary in the chapel, and I got a very clear image that, be a priest, not be a priest. Either one is fine, just so long as you live life keeping God's word at the forefront. There's not just one path. What I don't get to do, though, is try to set terms. And that's when I realized, by being a deacon, I'm negotiating with God. Yeah, I'll answer this call, but I want to keep my job and my house and my church and my neighborhood and my friends. And God was saying, no, either do it or don't. Both are fine.
Yeah.
You cannot break this.
Wow.
And so I applied to the Paulists, and they accepted me, and here we are.
Wow. I like that story because I think sometimes with the nature of vocation, we forget that there's a freedom there to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And it can feel very daunting when it seems like there's this one path and you have to find it. And if you don't find it, you'll be miserable. And also once you find it, you have to choose it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I remember from my 20s really clearly that every decision was vital.
Mm-hmm.
If I screw up now, the rest of my life is just going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And I see that with the students that I work with every day. I am living proof that you could screw up big and still come out okay.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I relate to those students a lot. I experienced that a lot in my 20s. And
yeah.
I think, I don't know what the cause of it is, but, if you want to kind of put into a wider context, like what a powerless God that we would believe in if we thought that if we didn't get everything right, we were doomed,
Yeah, and uncaring. Too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, for sure. Were the Paulist Fathers, I mean, did they have any hesitancy accepting you, like, given your background, or what, were they really just looking at the fruits of who you were now?
The issue was more my age.
How old were you?
Than anything else. I was 46.
Okay.
47. Yeah, I was around there. Because, to be perfectly frank, it costs a lot to build a priest.
Yeah.
The formation period for us is 5-6 years. And you've got to feed us, house us, insure us, send us to college for 4 years of that. It adds up quickly, and it's about $250,000.
Wow.
So are they getting somebody who's going to drop dead at ordination?
Right.
Don't want that.
Which what we were saying before we started, it sounds like you came not close to, but you had a scare.
Actually, doctors later told me that I was within a week or two of actually drinking myself to death.
Oh, well, I was talking about with the COVID that,
oh, well, that, yeah. I mean, that was just, it didn't kill me, but it would have been okay had it done. It was really ugly.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
But it shows a difference of how faith works in my life, because COVID hit and it basically knocked me flat for a year. It's so funny how different people react to it, because
Yeah.
the
It's the
rector of our
redhead
seminary,
thing.
the redhead thing. No, it wasn't just the redheads, but the rector of our seminary, who's like 74, he had a scratchy throat for about a day, and he was really angry that we locked him in his room for 2 weeks. That was his extent of COVID.
Yeah.
I was out for 2 weeks. And then another guy in our seminary got it really hard, and we figured, okay, well, it's the pudgy guys who are getting it hard. And then the guy across the hall from me, who runs marathons for fun, he got knocked out for a couple of weeks. So that wasn't it. But, and then when the symptoms don't go away, and when you've got a lot of muscle pain and joint pain and brain fog and fatigue, and there's no end in sight, that's a recipe, especially for somebody prone to clinical depression, to despair.
Yeah.
And there are moments of that, but I've noticed that since I have embraced faith, just my viewpoint of it has changed. So I did when I first got it, back in the OG COVID
Yeah.
days, back before the variants, I was really disappointed because I was still supposed to finish school. And I'd just been ordained a deacon. And I did not think that I was going to be ordained a priest because I wasn't getting better. And I was able to come through with the mindset of, okay, where's the lesson in this? What am I learning? And one of the things I was learning was how to be more empathetic to people suffering from chronic pain, chronic illness. How to accept limitations on myself. And then I got better. Well, I didn't just get better. Somehow the vaccinations made me feel like I had COVID again, and then I didn't feel quite so bad. But then I got it again in August of this past year, and I'm back to kind of where I was before, although it's not quite as bad. And still, there are moments of despair, but in general, it's more of a, okay, where is God in this? God has never left me before. God has not left me now. I'm just not seeing it. How can I open my mind to see God better?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, there's a myth for sure out there that if you, belong to Christ, and if you are, a good and faithful disciple, that you won't suffer. And that's blatantly
Wrong.
false. Blatantly
Wrong.
false. But I think what you do have is that you learn to suffer well, and you learn to suffer with meaning and purpose, and that you learn and you have the grace really to not be crushed and defeated by suffering.
The system that God put in place that created this beautiful earth with the beautiful sunsets and oceans and love and all those things also has in it pain, disease, illness. That same system that makes the pretty little butterflies also has suffering. So, not coming from God, what does come from God is strength, hope, and love. Love that connects us to other people. The faith that we can see what's gone on before in our lives and see where God has been. And it's up to us. I mean, we don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it changed my life and made me a much, much happier person.
Yeah. Yeah, clearly. Now, do you still participate in AA meetings yourself?
Oh, you betcha.
Really? Wow.
Absolutely.
So
I
that's
actually was part of starting one here at the church. We didn't have one before I got here. So let's fix that.
yeah, there's not a lot. I when I see AA meetings advertised, they're usually not at Catholic churches, and that's that's a shame. I mean, at least where I am, well, I mean, I guess the fact that it's Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe they're not advertising it as much. But
Well,
I've
yeah,
seen,
it's not advertised hugely. In Boston, they are, but you can't swing a dead cat in Boston without hitting a Catholic church. So I mean,
Right.
down here, we're 3% of the population, so you don't really have Catholic churches.
Yeah. Do you lead the meetings?
No,
Okay.
no, this is a student meeting.
Okay.
So it
Okay.
is just for students who are looking for recovery or interested or worried that they might have a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, the University of Tennessee campus has about 30,000 odd people,
Wow.
which means statistically, probably 2,500 of them have a substance abuse leaning or issue.
So the AA is run through the university, or it's run through the church?
No, it's just through the church. It
Okay.
just,
Okay.
we're right in the middle of campus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a good place to have it. And it's Friday night at 9 p.m.
Okay.
So the idea is if you're looking for something to not drink, Friday night at 9 p.m. on a college campus is probably a good place.
Right. Right. Wow. And what's it like for you walking with people who are in the beginnings of recovery?
It's a tremendous gift, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, Being invited into somebody's life, being trusted with that, somebody looking and saying, something is wrong and I don't know what, why, or how to fix it. Help me, help me, help me, help me, help me.
Mhm.
That that is something I've yet to get used to.
Wow. Yeah. Does it parallel a lot with your priestly ministry? I mean, hearing confessions and that kind of thing. It seems like a very, AA seems like a very confessional kind of setting.
It is. And I just started reading a book. I forget the author's name. Why isn't church more like an AA meeting?
Huh. That does sound
And
that's
the
interesting.
idea is that at an AA meeting, you come knowing that you have screwed up, we are broken, and we don't know how to fix it. And it's a similar, theoretically, at least in my head, there's a similar sense in the Catholic Church, or could be. I am broken. I am a sinner. I don't necessarily know how to fix it myself, probably because I can't.
Yeah.
God can. How do I come with that level of humility each Sunday? And then, refreshed by the community and the gift of the Eucharist, go out to do my real job, which is what Jesus told us: go build the kingdom.
Yeah, I think so often we can walk into church feeling good about ourselves because we're going to church.
Yeah.
I'm a good person. I'm here at church. When it's like, well, yeah, but the church that you go to is a church that believes that you need the church in the first place because you're not a good person.
Yeah. I mean, and we generally, I'd like to think we are good people. We just are broken.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's rare that someone has real malice in their heart, but
Yeah.
you know,
And different flavors of broken and different levels of broken. And sometimes that doesn't interfere with life very much, which makes it easy, for me at least, to think, okay, well, I got it. I'm on
yeah.
top of this. No worries.
Yeah.
And then something happens and, oh, what am I doing? Help,
Yeah.
help, help.
Yeah.
It becomes really rough for college students because their lives are so transitory. Every semester, there's a new schedule. They're moving 2, 3 times a year.
Yeah.
Classes are constantly changing. Everything is tumultuous, and there's no wonder they feel lost for 4 years. There's no stability.
That's a good point. I never thought about that before, but I mean, you're right. It's new classes, new roommate, new living situation, there's and then of course there's the stress of what am I going to do after college and I better choose the right thing or else, you
Yeah,
know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, when I think back to my time in college, I mean, that was definitely I mean, I had some great experiences, but I also had probably some of my lowest lows,
yeah. And faith can really help be sort of a foundation, a grounding to then spring forth and deal with all this transition, all this tumultuous nonsense.
for sure. All right, so to close, I just want to ask you two more questions.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, to somebody who's listening who may be struggling with addiction or who may know somebody in their life who seems like they're struggling with addiction, what would you say?
If you know somebody who is struggling with addiction, you cannot fix them.
Mm.
You cannot take over their lives and fix them. And down that road lies madness. Um, the best we can do is love that person, pray for that person, care for that person, and let them know that you are there when they hit that bump. I'm not saying accept the behavior. I'm not saying let it go without repercussions, but nothing that I do is going to fix another addict. That is something that that person needs to internalize. And that's a harsh lesson. That's really hard. But any more than a person who had a heart attack, if they refuse to go off and change their high cholesterol ways, we can't fix that. If you happen to be listening to this and are suffering from an addiction problem, chances are it feels right now like the world is closing in on you and everybody else is pushing in on that. They're not helping you with anything the way that substance is, be it booze or chemicals or pills or shooting, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, everybody is telling you to stop doing that one thing that makes everything better. Except that one thing is making everything worse. And there is help. It's not easy, but it's the best thing ever. But you have to start by asking for help.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest bridge you will ever have to go over.
Yeah. And then last question, if you could think back to yourself, let's say before you really had your first sip of alcohol, what would you say to that kid, or what do you wish you would have known? Not that God hasn't woven a beautiful tapestry out of your life, but for somebody in that position before it all gets really bad, like, what
Before
would you
you
wish?
drove off the cliff there, Father Rich, what would you like to do differently?
Well, I mean, for
I'd
somebody,
like to learn not to drive.
yeah.
No, that's a great question, and I've asked myself that a lot. Because as I look back, I do see off ramps all over the place where I could have reached out and asked for help and gotten things together. Um, However, in many ways, I can't imagine being anywhere else than where I am right now at this red hot moment because of the experiences that I had. I can actually look back and see my addiction as a gift, which I would not have said 15 years ago. But now I can very clearly see it as a gift because it has made me the person that I am now. It has given me a faith that I can't imagine having without that level of adversity. And the mental illness that went with it, again, that's part of the picture. If I did have a time machine and went back and talked to 17-year-old me, I wouldn't listen.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Or even 13 or even 8-year-old. I would not have heard that. There are some people that can be told, don't touch that. It's hot. There are some people that want to put both their hands up there multiple times to see if the heat level is changing. I'm that one. So all these obstacles God put in, I don't know if God put them in my way, but they were there, and I am able to embrace them with God's help to make me a better person.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and how beautiful that we serve a God who, we don't have to have regrets when we follow, because he takes all of those things that should be regrets and works them for good.
If anything, I think my biggest regrets are the people that I hurt along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the steps too, is to make amends, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Which is like, first you take the big humility pill by, admitting you need help, and then, you know, you have to take that
And
other
then,
humility
yeah,
pill.
then you do it again with other people. And a buddy of mine has all the greatest amends stories, including one where he drove over a bunch of signs in front of a police station and just tore it up a bit. And so he went back a couple of years later and said, "Look, I'm an alcoholic. I did this. I'm sorry. I'm ready to do whatever it needs to make it better." And he was expecting to go to jail. And the
Wow.
cops just smiled and brought him coffee, and they talked and they walked out arm in arm, smiling and laughing. I don't have any of those stories.
Really?
All of my amends stories involve yelling and mean, nasty words, and I
uh,
deserved all of them.
oh, wow. Wow. Well, on that, I don't know what to say to that. But thank you so much for sharing your story, your testimony, what God has done in your life, and I think it's just a message of hope, from where you came from such a place of despair to see, you know, that there's a light on the other side, and that it is a way that you can now reach people who are in that same position. I think is beautiful. So
Thank you, and
thank
thanks
you.
for asking me. I'm absolutely honored.
Oh, well, good. Well, God bless you in the ministry that you're doing with college students. I'm right there with you. So
Yeah, blessings to you too, and thank you for all you do. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
awesome. All righty.